Yeah, that would do. Yeah.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if we could please take our seats so we can welcome our next distinguished speaker. Yesterday, Andrew Collins gave us a fascinating account of Göbekli Tepe and the amazing discoveries there, and how that also pushes back the timeline of human activities and achievements. And I just love listening to that, because I see so much, personally, so much interesting crossover between some of the things that we're finding in southern Africa to the Göbekli Tepe structures. But today, Andrew is going to take us on a very, very exciting journey of discovery that he made, and very few people are actually aware of this. And those are the underground caves at Giza Plateau under the pyramid. And it is truly fascinating. I've seen this before, and so hold on for an absolutely fascinating journey. Andrew Collins.
Hiya. Okay. Plenty to get through, 1 hour to do it. So I just want to dedicate this lecture to my wife, who's actually watching me at this moment from our home very close to Stonehenge. So, hi, Sue. Okay. Now, yesterday, as Michael said, we talked about Göbekli Tepe. This is the oldest stone temple complex in the world, as officially dated. That's 10,000 BC to around 8,000 BC, when it was deliberately buried. What I showed was that the shamanic elite behind it, who are remembered in the ancient texts as the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Shining Ones, the gods, the immortals, had almost certainly come originally from Egypt, the Nile Valley in particular. They were bird shamans, very tall, possibly with albino features, and they would seem possibly to have been behind much earlier activity in Africa itself. And it's some of this that I'd like to talk to you about today, and ancient Egypt in general. Now, obviously, many of you probably know the idea that there may be something awaiting discovery beneath the pyramids at Giza. The idea that there has been some kind of hidden or secret chamber there has been popular, certainly since the 1910s, when it first appeared in newspapers. However, it was the American psychic Edgar Cayce who really brought the whole subject to the fore. And between 1926 and 1941, he gave a number of psychic readings which referred to what he called the Hall of Records. Now, he saw them quite physically as some kind of chamber in the vicinity of the Sphinx, containing the tablets or records of a previous civilization that had occupied Egypt around 10 to 11,000 BC. And right from 1957 on to the present day, there have been a number of explorations, almost all of them legally done through the authorities. The first was 2 American women in 1957 who went to the Giza Plateau, a time of great unrest in Egypt, and somehow were able to get drilling done in the area of the Sphinx Temple, which is what Robert Temple was talking to you about yesterday. And although they didn't find anything other than the water table itself, this began the explorations, which are always, in some way, shape or form, got some connection with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, which is known as the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of which I'm a regular speaker at their conferences in Virginia Beach. Now, the latest explorations around the Sphinx looking for hidden chambers actually took place as recently as 2008. Dr. Zahi Hawass and the American archaeologist Dr. Mark Lerner used angular drills, supposedly to check the groundwater around the Sphinx. But I don't think it's any great secret that their true aim was to check out the latest ideas relating to chambers beneath the Sphinx, of the body of the Sphinx. However, in 2010, our good friend Dr. Hawass said officially that there are no hidden chambers or tunnels under the Sphinx, and that, to be honest, he would not entertain any further exploration in that area, full stop. Well, of course, he's now gone. I'm sure plenty of people will clap their hands over that one. But he was like a pantomime dame because, you know, on the outside, in the public thing, he denounced all of these subjects, but in private, he believed in all of them. So there's double standards for you. Now, my own quest to understand Gizas Cave Underworld began in 1985, and I'll happily admit that it was through some psychic work that I was doing with a good friend of mine and a very strange dream he had relating to the Sphinx, and I'll talk about his work later on. But this culminated with some incredible discoveries in 2008, which I need to talk to you about now. But just as a little backdrop, there is a number of ancient texts that seem to refer to some kind of underworld in the vicinity of Giza and its plateau. For instance, the Edfu building text, which Graham talked about last night in his lecture, although from the Ptolemaic period, i.e. just before the time of Christ, almost certainly record very, very ancient accounts of primeval beings, known as the eldest ones or the primeval ones, that existed during a primordial age, not just in Egypt, but in the area of Giza. And there's talk of them within the text constructing some kind of island, and on that island, a building, the first ever temple, and that this led down to an underground structure known as the underworld of the soul, the Duat Embar is what it's referred to. And into this, the mythical beings would go using power objects to affect creation in the outside world. The image you can see here, minus the strange watcher figure, which I've added, is actually from the psychic that I was working with. I was telling you about a guy called Bernard, who sadly died last year. And he said exactly the same thing. And this was long before I even found out anything about the Edfu building text, that there was a divine island at Giza. And of course, this is what Antoine was also talking about yesterday. So I would agree with all of this work. Now, within the ancient funerary texts of Egypt, it talks about a cave underworld that's on the ground and in the air. It's known as the Duat, the same name that appears in the Edfu building texts for this structure beneath Giza. And as Graham said, in the fifth house of this Duat, which there's 12 houses, each one relates to the 12 hours of the night, through which the sun is seen to pass, which is also reflected in the soul of the pharaoh as he goes into death and passes through this Duat or underworld on his way to an afterlife amongst the stars, that there is an area known as Rostau, and Rostau is guarded by this figure here who's known as Sokar. Sokar was an underworld falcon-headed god associated very specifically with the necropolis of Memphis, i.e. that which includes Giza. In fact, it's from that we get the name of the necropolis called Saqqara. And there are some very odd structures there, which we'll come back to, but they seem to relate directly to Giza. Now, the Duat, as I said, is reflected both on the ground, in a physical sense, and in the air as well as the Milky Way, where it is associated with one goddess in particular, and that's Nuet. Some people call her Nut, but I think that's doing her an injustice of her name. And it is believed that her body actually represented the Duat in the air. Now, her cult is entangled completely with that of another sky goddess by the name of Hathor. And Hathor was said to give birth to the sun each day from between her groins in the form of a cow. And this cow would appear between two sycamores and be reborn. And those two sycamores relate to what's known as the dark rift or Cygnus rift of the Milky Way. And this also is the same area of the goddess Nuit, if she too is reflected as an embodiment of the Milky Way. Usually she's portrayed as this naked woman arcing over the earth, and certain images of the Milky Way can clearly, resemble this woman or a person, arcing over the earth. I've seen it myself when I was in Texas, and it's quite a remarkable thing. And it does seem as if the Milky Way was one form of the duat in the sky. Now, just here, for instance, here's her head, obviously, and where you get to the area of her womb and her birth canal, this is marked by the stars of a constellation called Cygnus, which in Europe and most of the world is known as the Celestial Swan. It's also known as the Northern Cross. You can still see it here in South Africa. It has its obviously southern counterpart, the Southern Cross, which I saw for the first time in my life just a few days ago, because you can't see it in the Northern Hemisphere. But anyway, this area, known as the Cygnus Rift or the Dark Rift here, also known as the Great Rift, is important in religious and shamanic ideas all the way around the world as almost like a cave-like entrance into an underworld, one that is both in the sky and also down below as well, possibly in the form of a cave underworld. Now, on both a daily basis and a yearly basis, the sun in ancient Egypt, as it was in many other places in the world, in Ireland, for instance, with Newgrange, and in Mexico with the Maya, the sun is seen to be reborn from the Cygnus Rift. Now, the reason for this, if I can just go back to Nuit, is that the Cygnus Rift begins in this area here, let's say the womb, and any child, being born through the canal, falls down here to a point there which crosses the point of the ecliptic, the place where the sun actually crosses the Milky Way and becomes the point on the horizon where both the sun and the Milky Way are aligned perfectly. And this is, again, very, very important across the world. And the birth canal associated with that is Cygnus. Right, come on to that. Now, I'll go back onto this. For instance, I just talked about the Maya, but this tradition seems to go back even further to the culture which preceded them, which was the Olmecs. Various Olmec sites seem to be linked with the cult of Cygnus. The work of a Mayan expert by the name of Marian Popenu Hatch brought this out in various papers which have been totally ignored by the academic community. I cited them in my book, The Cygnus Mystery, and most important was that she showed that La Venta, which was a major Olmec site in Mexico, seems to have a reflection in the orientation towards Cygnus. But here you have this quite incredible, what they call were-jaguar altar. Now, a jaguar was a very important shamanic animal to the Olmec, just as it was for the Maya. And this one here is very, very interesting. It's from La Venta, and it shows this character here who's considered to be a were-jaguar. That's half human, half jaguar, emerging from what's considered to be a cave, an entrance exit to the underworld. And it actually is a mouth here of this creature, this monster. You can see his teeth there. And you can see here these cross bands. Now, Marian Popenu Hatch made a good claim to show that those cross bands are actually representative in an abstract form of the constellation of Cygnus. So basically what this guy is doing, and I assume it's a guy, is actually emerging from the underworld, from the Cygnus Rift. That's what he's actually doing, with the Cygnus connection there. And of course, this was carried over into the Maya. And for those of you interested in the whole 2012 phenomena, it's pretty well accepted in the books by people like John Major Jenkins that the new sun on the 21st of December 2012 will be seen to be reborn from the Cygnus Rift. Look it up, it's all there. Now, this is something which is quite controversial. Now, Robert Bouval is a friend and colleague of mine. but we have a bit of a running debate over the Orion correlation theory. It's something that is quite public, so it's no secret. Because a few years ago, a friend of mine, an engineer by the name of Rodney Hale, who was very enamoured by the Orion correlation, decided that he would attempt to overlay the actual stars upon the pyramids, because this is actually not done in the book, the Orion Mystery. And so he took photographs of the stars of Orion and got those from star programs and overlaid them, and was extremely disappointed with what he found. Because obviously, if you've got 3 stars over 3 pyramids, you can overlay 2 perfectly all the time. But he found that the 3rd pyramid, and the 3rd being the marker for the 3rd one, if you put all the offset on one particular pyramid, the star doesn't even hit the pyramid. And what he felt was that if the ancient Egyptians wanted to align the pyramids so accurately to north and south, to within, a degree or just a few minutes of north, then surely they might have got this right. Now, because of that, he put it to one side. And then when I was working on the relationship of the Cygnus constellation worldwide, he had a bit of an inspiration one night and just decided that he would see what would happen if you put the main stars of Cygnus over the pyramids. And this is what he got. And this has been corrected for proper motion to a date of 2500 BC, which is the conventional date of the construction of the 3 pyramids. And what you can see is that the 3, what we call the wing stars, because Cygnus is universally seen as a bird around the world, usually a swan, sometimes a vulture, sometimes an eagle, a falcon. In Egypt, it's an ibis, a goose, and possibly some kind of hawk or falcon. Is that if you put the main stars on it, the 3 wing stars fit pretty well, much better fit over the 3 obvious pyramids. Another star known as Alberia, which is the second brightest star in Cygnus, falls on what's known as Jebel Gibli, which is a hill just to the south of the Sphinx, which is here. And this particular hill is very significant, which we'll come on to, and the other main star we'll talk about separately. Jebel Gibli, which is the name of this so-called southern mount to the south of the Sphinx, it's just about 300 yards. Jebel Gibli means the southern mount, but it also has an alternative name, which is Tafaya, which I'm reliably informed by the person that told me this, which was a native, of the area, that it means the place of the beginning or the first place, which is incredible because Simon Cox, in Robert Bouval's book, The Secret Chamber, made a good case for Göbekli Tepe being the place mentioned on the stela on the breast of the Sphinx, which refers to it being placed next to the splendid place of the first time, the splendid place of Zeb Tepe, and that it was actually Göbekli Tepe. And I think Mark Lerner, Dr. Mark Lerner, believe that Göbekli Tepe was the original survey point for the Giza Plateau. In other words, the surveyors, before they built anything, came up, stood up on this hill and made all their measurements and then went away and put it into flat plan. And I fully believe that that's the case. And if you actually take Jebel Gibli into the whole story and say, well, what else is there? Some remarkable things occur, because during the Pyramid Age, if you'd have been on the top of Jebel Gibli at night, you would have seen all the stars of Cygnus set within the second pyramid, the middle of the 2 pyramid. More specifically, the brightest star, Cygnus, and we've checked this very, very carefully, sat perfectly down into the apex of the second pyramid. All the other stars fall into it in some way. Plus, more importantly, this smoke here is the Milky Way. So let's get this right. From Jebel Gibli, the southern mount, the place of the first time, looking through the second pyramid, you could see the Milky Way and all the stars of Cygnus set down into it. That would have been pretty impressive. But more significantly, if you continue that line from the second pyramid through Jebel Gibli, just a couple of kilometers, you would see all of the 3 stars of Cygnus, the 3 that overlay from a vertical position. You would see all 3 of them set into the same 3 pyramids. So, not only is this alignment vertical, but it's also horizontal as well. Okay, now, obviously I don't want to upset anybody that believes in the Orion correlation. I just want you to know that there are some alternative ideas as well. However, working with the Cygnus Giza, alignment, it's okay with these 4 stars there. They mark something. What about Deneb, though? This is the brightest star in Cygnus. I already mentioned that could be seen setting down into the second pyramid, but did it have a marker on the ground? Well, it does. It's a mastaba, which is like a forerunner of the pyramids, a very large stone tomb-like structure, which is known as Lepsius 14, which is a number given to it by Richard Carl Lepsius, a German archaeologist and explorer who did work at Giza around the middle of the 19th century. There's very little known about this site, and there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of mastabas actually on the Giza plateau. So for me, that was a disappointment. But I mentioned this to somebody, and they said, well, surely this is good. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this might actually mark the entrance to something underground, maybe the Hall of Records. And I said, well, I hadn't looked at it like that. I was just looking for something obvious on the surface. They said, well, why don't you look to see if there's anything underneath the plateau in this area? So that was the first time that this idea was ingrained in my brain, to look for evidence of caves in this area of the plateau. Now, this is my colleague Nigel Skinner-Simpson. He's an Egyptological researcher, and a very, very good one. What he doesn't know about the work that's been done at the Giza, you really, don't need to know almost. And one day he came round to my house in 2006 with a plan, one that was shown to you yesterday by Antoinette, by an English engineer called John Perrin. And it was done around 1840. And you can see the obvious things here. There's the Sphinx, there's a Great Pyramid, Second Pyramid. There's a Deneb spot here. And my interest was taken immediately to this area. I know it's not the Deneb spot, but I'll come back to that. And there was this weird crescent with a hole in it, and these structures here. And next to it was the words excavated tombs and pits of bird mummies. Here it is here, excavated tombs and pits of bird mummies. Now, I'd never come across this before. I'd never heard anybody mention it. And this seemed to imply that there was some kind of bird necropolis at Giza. So we asked around. There was nothing published about it at all. And the significant point about this is that because Cygnus is so obviously a bird, whether it be a goose, an ibis, or a falcon, if you had some entrance into a cave underworld, then almost certainly a cult would begin to revolve around it, associated with making offerings to some kind of bird god or goddess. Now, it didn't say what type of birds were being found, and looking into the works of Colonel Howard Weiss, who's most remembered, as Graham said, for using dynamite to blow holes in the Great Pyramid. He also left a very fine diary reports of all of his work, and for a certain day in 1837, he talks about going into this tomb and states quite specifically that they removed the remains of a large bird mummy. And so this added to what was said on Perring's plan, and Perring was Weiss's engineer. So it was quite obvious that there was something here that needed to be checked out. So I wondered what type of bird might have been involved. And the most obvious thing, when it said a large bird, to me a large bird is sort of this size, not that size. And the only one that really would make sense was the ibis being the animal form, the bird form of the god Thoth, the keeper of records. And I thought, well, wait a minute, Hall of Records, keeper of records, underground library, that makes some sort of sense. But there was no confirmation of what type of bird mummies were found in there. Now, we looked on the Google map. My colleague Rodney Howe looked on a map and found that this tomb still existed. A tomb which, by the way, we couldn't find any other information about whatsoever. Not one reference in a standard textbook on the tombs and monuments of Giza or Egypt. But there it is. It existed in the North Cliff. Antoine was talking about this area here, that beyond it was water in prehistoric times, which is probably quite likely. Here's just another picture to give you perspective. The Sphinx down here, there's the three pyramids, what we started to refer to as the Tomb of the Birds, because there was no other designation at this time, was up there. It's exactly due west of the Great Pyramid, about several hundred yards or meters from that position. And so obviously we had to go there. And this is what it's like on the ground. Myself and my wife Sue went there in January 2007. It's an enormous entrance. It's dark inside. So, everything, all the pictures here are basically taken using a flash. You should always remember that. And we looked around. I mean, you can see that there's lots of debris that blows in off the desert here. And quite clearly, probably a few locals go in there once in a while. But to be honest, there was very little in there. We found more evidence of some kind of bird or animal cult in there. There are a number of slots in the walls within a side chamber and a back chamber, some small, some quite large, some of them looking like letterboxes, which would almost certainly have had, if not birds, small little animals like shrews and mice, or even perhaps snakes, which would have been offered in the mummified form to the bird deity. And this is exactly what you find at Saqqara. There are bird sanctuaries there, and not only do you find mummified birds, but mummified shrews and mice, the sort of food that the birds would have lived off in the afterlife. So no entrance was found into this pits of bird mummies, which had been referenced on Perrin's map. But I felt convinced that we were at the right place, and that, I don't know, something told me that there was something more to this place that we were missing. However, having said that, went back to the UK and got on with other work at that time. But this area kept cropping up. My colleague Rodney Hale, the engineer, started to look at some very simple geometry of the monuments of Giza. For instance, he drew a 3-4-5 triangle, which is the so-called Pythagorean triangle, starting at Jebel Gibli, which if we see as the original survey point, taking in the head of the Sphinx, which is due north of that point, turning here west to take in the apex of the Great Pyramid, turning here, which I'll come on to, but also going through the apex of the second pyramid. The third pyramid's involved in other geometry, which I won't go into here. And the point that it turns here was within about 50 yards, 50 meters or so, of the Tomb of the Birds. And there's no other monument there. Plus, the Tomb of the Birds is absolutely due west of the Great Pyramid. And I thought, there's something about this place that's significant that we're definitely missing here. And as a separate branch of activity, what I didn't know is that my colleague, Nigel Skinner-Simpson, had been looking roughly into this area since 2003, when he read the life and correspondences of Henry Salt. Now, he was a British diplomat and explorer who did work with an Italian by the name of Giovanni Caviglia on the plateau from 1817 onwards. They were basically looking for treasures and artifacts, of course. And this book, in about one line, talks about these two characters going into catacombs to the west of the Great Pyramid. And for Nigel, this was a complete mystery because he's, as far as he was aware, there were no catacombs west of the Great Pyramid. But then in May 2007, this is just 4 months after Sue and I went to the Tomb of the Birds for the first and only time up to that point, the memoirs of Henry Salt were published for the first time. Now, they'd been found in the British Museum who didn't know they even had them. So they got them together for publication, wrote a commentary on them, And sure enough, there was a couple of paragraphs about these catacombs. And it said that in 1817, Salt and Caviglia entered these catacombs, these caves, it refers to specifically to caves, west of the Great Pyramid, and travelled for a distance of several hundred yards before coming upon a spacious chamber linking with 3 others of equal size. It was in an area on his plan marked QQ. And the commentators, because they had not been able to find this area marked on the map, had wrongly associated it with a cemetery group known as around G1600, which is on the north side of the Great Pyramid. But Nigel knew that this was absolutely wrong, and he checked every single marking on the handwritten plan of Salt and eventually found the QQs, which were actually written in an old 19th century style, looking like twos. And these QQs were here, and the Tomb of the Birds was there. And as soon as he told me this, when we were sitting outside the British Museum that same month, I said, well, it has to be the Tomb of the Birds. He said, well, hold on, be careful. There's 2 other smaller little tombs in the area. He said, it might be one of those. I said, no, it's the Tomb of the Birds. We've missed something and we need to go back. I said that even if it's just Perrins, pits of bird mummies, whatever they are, we've got to go back there. So on the 3rd of March 2008, myself, Sue, Nigel Skinner-Simpson with a guide, went over there, took camels because it was the easiest to carry all of our equipment. We got back to the Tomb of the Birds. We went inside. I searched, found nothing to start with, was about to leave when we discovered in the darkness, and this has to be pointed out, a small crack in the wall right at the back of the tomb. And this is me inside it, and there's the crack. And peering through that, for the first time, we saw the massive chamber entering into a huge cave system, and we'd missed it completely on the first time. Now, this is obviously a flash shot. It's pitch black, full of rocks and debris that's fallen from the ceiling, and hundreds of bats were flying out of this hole. But I knew we had to explore it, so we did so. Myself and my wife went down it for at least a couple hundred feet on the first and second, and each time we did it, we pushed further and further. I'll show you various pictures now of us inside it, of me inside the caves going into the main corridor, which basically leads towards the south. Notice the red ochre on the walls here. Doesn't come out very well through this cord, but this place is full of red ochre, which I think is quite significant as well. Here's us navigating the cave. There's my wife, Sue, inside the North-South Passage in April. We went back in April because we got home after 2 attempts and said we just got to go straight back there. You can see the size of the huge boulders that must have fallen from the ceiling. Look at this black here. These are natural. There's no question. We realised that these were natural. This is, we think, something like manganese, which is a result of effects of water passing through the caves. Remember, all this is in pitch darkness. No lighting. All we had was small torches and the flash of the cameras and the zero lux on a camcorder to light our way. Very, very dangerous. You know, you can fall into pits at any time, break a leg or worse. Plus, the bats are flying past you all the time. One hit me right in the face at one point, knocked me flying. And my wife identified a spider in there, which we checked out when we came out before we went back the second time. And it's unquestionably, that the closest we could get is the white widow, which is obviously the sister of the black widow, and you get bitten by that and you're in serious trouble, basically. Plus, I've also learned since then that there are camel spiders in there, which are up to 6 to 8 inches long. So clearly, when we went back in the later times, you had to cover up a bit. And take breathing apparatus. The bats, the guano filled the air. The bat dung in microscopic form. It carries deadly viruses in it, including histoplasmosis, which can easily make you blind and can kill. Plus, rabies is also carried in airborne bat guano. 1 in 100 bats in Egypt has rabies. Now, the caves, as I said, are natural. As today, it's difficult. I put 200,000 years here. They're possibly even older than that. And we're possibly on an ancient shoreline in the Pliocene age in geological history, and that was around 2 million years ago. All the geology to this is online at my site, andrewcollins.com. There are no hieroglyphs at all anywhere in the tomb or anywhere in the caves. However, there are like weird little, unfortunately you can't see this, weird little parallel lines. Now, they may have been functional, but they may have been symbolic. Some of them are under, on overlays, and they don't seem to have any functional purpose. Definitely people have been in there and, used it at various places. Artifacts, only one thing, I just happened to notice something on the ground. I thought, what the hell is that? Picked it up. It was an extremely small mummy, like a massive cigar, basically. No idea what it was. Probably contained the body of a small animal, like a shrew or mouse. Put that straight back down at that point. This is Sue again, towards the end of the cave. The further you get into it, the more the cave's clear. That's very interesting. You don't get the large rocks anymore. You can just walk and walk and walk. Having said this, we're only talking about going a distance of around 350 feet, because eventually at this point, the whole thing narrows down. You go from one chamber to another, and the furthest point we got was what we call the tube, where it narrows down to about I don't know, half a metre, no, probably a maximum of a metre, but then gets tighter. And we didn't go through there. One of the biggest regrets of our life on the final one. But I think it was the correct decision. Sue heard something rustling deep down inside this tube, an animal or creature of some kind, which we certainly didn't want to encounter. Plus, we were feeling very odd in there, and we realised afterwards we might well have been suffering from the first symptoms of oxygen starvation after having been down in there for a maximum of about 45 minutes. It was the right decision at the time. Here's the plan on the left that I did after we came out. There's another picture of Sue there. This I needed because the people that sponsored our work out there was the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the ARE. They obviously were very interested in this discovery and sponsored, or partly sponsored, I should say, our activities out there. And, obviously when we found this case for the first time, and I went back and wrote a short note to John Van Alken, who's the president of the ARE, and as I was typing it out, just this thought came into my mind of Howard Carter contacting Lord Carnarvon to say that they'd found the tomb at the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings. I don't know, just a little feel of that. It was a very good feeling indeed. You can all boo at this point. Right, no, seriously. After obviously we found it, we realised that we had to declare what we'd discovered. And John Van Alken first notified Dr. Zahi. They have a working relationship, and showed Zahi, I'll call him that if I may, pictures of the caves, and he was very, very interested. This was October 2008, so just a few months after we'd come out there on the second occasion. However, there was no real response after that, and myself and Sue met Zahi in his office in Cairo in April 2009. At this point, he clammed up completely and said that we know everything about this tomb, which was a lie, and that there are no caves at all there. A few months later, the news story broke online. Discovery News, MSNBC, countless other news sites, over 6,000 web pages discussing the issue within 3 weeks. The whole subject went phenomenal. Had the entrance to the Hall of Records been found, this forced Hawass to come out with a public statement saying that I can say that there is no underground cave complex at this site and that we know all about it. However, I knew that when we met him, and he said, "Look, we know all about this tomb." Well, where's the evidence? "Oh, I'll send it to you." But I said, "There's a whole natural cave system behind there." And he didn't respond to me. And he thought for a moment, and then he just said the same thing. There's nothing, we know all about this. I just knew we got him. They did know nothing about it. So after the whole thing broke, things started happening. First we got whisper that something was going on at the tomb, and then it became obvious on Google Map February 2009, this is the Tomb of the Birds. You can see everything's clear there. November 2009, huge, great piles of debris outside. Something's going on inside. And I found that Dr. Hawass had taken a team straight in there and had cleared the floor in the Tomb of the Birds and had uncovered 2 staircases just inside the tomb, which led down into this massive underground gallery. Here was Perring's pits of bird mummies, and down the middle of it were pillars which went directly beneath the tomb that we already knew about. Plus, there are a series of other chambers coming off, which have either been fully or partly excavated, plus them leading into other structures. A massive, huge complex exists at this site. But this is definitely man-made, basically. And now we can start to understand what Perring was drawing. And it becomes clear that Perring was not drawing the caves. The caves had not been explored by Perring and Weiss. That one there might be something to do with the first chamber, the dome as we refer to it. But clearly, all he's showing is the underground structure that Hawass and his team have uncovered. So what happens next? It's gated. And I'm glad of this because we actually implored Hawass to put a gate on it because we knew that now that the whole story had broken, or, this was even before the story had broken, you'd get all sorts of people in here, some with good intent, some with not so good intent, and they would ruin not just the delicate ecosystem in there of the bats and the spiders and all the other bugs and things in there, and what other animals might use it even at night, but the archaeological work there for the future, because it was quite clear that Hawass did not do any work inside the caves themselves. So they put this grill on it and it's cemented in place. Nobody's going inside either the tomb or the caves anytime soon. There's another picture of it there. But of course, what happens next? That I get whisper that the caves are going to feature on television. A program, a reality show featuring Dr. Zahi Hawass is going to be screened by the History Channel, which it was on in America between July and September 2010. They're following him around, making discoveries around Egypt and shouting at people a lot. And in the episode called Bats, which we were pre-warned about, keep a watch out. And sure enough, there's Hawass being taken into the tomb before it was gated by the film team, which included 2 archaeologists, this guy here, David Cheaton and Alan Morton, if I remember right there, their names. And they explored the whole thing. And this was just like me biting my teeth, seeing the whole thing of what they were going to find, because the idea was to disprove the pyramidians like myself. Anyway, we knew it was there. They eventually got to the end of the chamber. It was great to see the whole thing lit properly. And David Cheatham actually went along the tube, went for a distance of around 30 feet and stopped. Now, when he came out of it, he said, it ends there. And I'll come back to that in a second. But Hawass, at this point, they panned to him and he said, I have never made any adventure like this at Giza before, which basically means that this was the greatest adventure that he'd ever been on at Giza. And he must have been on a few, one presumes. Which is slightly contradictory to his earlier statement, is that I can say that there is no underground cave complex at this site. And this is just, this is a composite picture by my colleague Rodney Hale, put together from ours when we panned first in. I mean, look at the size of that. That's me. That's Nigel Skinner-Simpson. That's the first chamber of the dome. I mean, it's immense. It's incredible that this has been missed for 200 years. The last people in there that we know about was Henry Salt and Giovanni Caviglia in 1817. As far as I'm aware, I don't know of anybody that's been in those caves. Once the whole thing hit the internet, I assumed that somebody would pop up and say, oh, actually, I've been in there. But to date, nobody has come forward. And quite clearly, even if they did claim that now, I'd want to see a little bit of evidence that that was true. However, it doesn't end there because, firstly, I can tell you, and I can't say how I can tell you because I would be breaking confidences, that tube continues on. How far, we don't know, and whether there are other entrances into deeper parts of it, we don't know. But what I can say to you is that the caves, or certainly the geology relating to them, possibly fault lines through which caves appear, can be seen on a radar map done by this company, the TerraSAR X company. This was done in July 2007, and exactly in the position where the caves are, you can see this dark area there. But much more importantly is that there are two dark bands continuing all the way to the second pyramid. Here's one of them here. I'll show you the other one in a second. Going all the way from the area of the caves all the way to the northwest corner of the second pyramid. Here's the contours of the Giza Plateau. And here's the two bands. You can clearly see them. See them? Okay. This is backed up with geology. In 1977, Lambert Dolphin worked around the second pyramid, and he found two large cavities, chambers 21 metres and 33 metres below Belzani's chamber. That's inside the second pyramid. Another anomaly 4 feet below the floor of the horizontal parallel passage leading to Belzani's chamber. Also around the perimeter at the northwest end of it, face anomalies found up to 6 metres deep, but this area is heavily faulted. This is exactly what we think is being shown here. And the faulting which he actually drew, we actually aligned it and placed it, and it corresponds perfectly with the lower of the two lines. I'm positive that this shows the faulting and almost certainly caves that head right beneath the second pyramid. So, going back to Cygnus then, well, okay, earlier on you said that you thought that there might be something beneath the Deneb spot. Can you elaborate more on that? Well, firstly, yes, because those bands, those lines, let's take it back to that for a second. Hold on. Right there, actually goes right beneath the Deneb spot. Now, that could be just a coincidence, but I like that idea, and I have further work I intend to do around Lepsius 14 in the future. However, what else do we know? Well, what I can say is that the Tomb of the Birds is right at the very beginning of the Cygnus Rift, if the whole of Cygnus and the Milky Way was overlaid on the plateau. But just to show you here for the easiness, because it gets very messy if you overlay it on top. Here's Deneb there, and the Tomb of the Birds would correspond to there, and there's the Dark Rift. So in other words, the Dark Rift and the cave system correspond together. I don't think that that's a coincidence. But why might the second pyramid be important? What about the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx? Well, the reason why the second pyramid is important is because it was traditionally seen as the site of the tomb of Hermes. Hermes, as Graham said last night, is the name that was given to the Egyptian god Thoth by the Hellenic Greeks who came into Egypt with Alexander around 330 BC. You know, they used their own names for the Egyptian gods. And he is the keeper of records, the keeper of truth. So is it possible that these tunnels go eventually to the tomb of Hermes, which is somewhere beneath the second pyramid? And what is the tomb of Hermes? Clearly this is a name for something else. Well, the traditions tell us that Hermes is buried with the original of this ancient text, which is not that long, but is this valuable Hermetic text known as the Emerald Tablet. The original of that is contained with him, and he holds that in his hands. Here it is seen, and it's said that the original Emerald Tablet contains within it the secrets of creation. This was an old Arab story relating to it. And that's interesting because I happen to know, again, no names, no patrial, that some very important Egyptologists also believe in the Hall of Records, and they see it in their own way, and they think that it is a physical representation of the tomb of Hermes, and that the Emerald Tablet relates to the fact that the texts, maybe the originals of the pyramid texts, are on the walls, and just maybe the walls are green, either painted green or the actual stone is green in some way. Now, this is an image that was done in 1985 by my psychic friend Bernard, because the original dream he had of going under the plateau was of entering into this green chamber. But he saw it much more technologically advanced than anything that we've come across, with these weird grooves in the floor, some parts of the wall being pushed in, some parts of the wall being pushed out, strange hieroglyphs. Now, this could be a fantasy, but what I find really interesting is this room has exactly the same. Some parts of the walls pushed in, some parts of the wall pushed out. And why is that there? For sound, acoustics. He also believed that there were other structures underneath there, including this something here, these 12 greenstone chambers, which he believed had weird acoustics, all related to sound. And he was the guy that originally told me that he felt that this structure, this underground structure, which we refer to as the crystal chambers, was accessed via an island. That originally the area around the Sphinx was some kind of divine island, as Antoine said yesterday, and it's work that I brought out in my book Gods of Eden back in 1998. And I do believe that there was some divine island at Giza, and on that island is the entrance to this underworld, the Duat. But what exactly does it contain? One guy that knew about the caves was a tomb guardian we met there. He never went in there himself. He's the only guy that actually we know that knew about it. And I said, why wouldn't you go in there? He said, because it was the haunt of El Hanash. I said, what's that? And in Arabic, he could not speak a word of English and has no contact with the New Age movement, who obviously frequent the plateau. He said it was a giant snake that inhabited the caves, which he said, by the way, went all the way to the Fayum oasis, 45 miles away from that position. Although I think that is purely fantasy, in all honesty, although I think that they do go for some distance. And now this was intriguing, so I've tried to find out a bit about this El Hanash, which I couldn't find about in any book, but I found one story from a local in Nazla El Saman, the little village next to the plateau, and he said, I can tell you the prophecy of El Hanash, that he guards a treasure underneath the plateau, a giant crystal or diamond, and that anybody that tries to get into this secret chamber, this hall of records, will be blinded and will have to turn back. But one day somebody will come along and they will come before this giant diamond or crystal, and they will be blinded in just one eye. And they will be the ones that will be allowed to learn its secret, and they will gain great power and be able to affect creation in the outside world. Almost similar sort of terms of what the Edfu building text has said about the primeval ones, the eldest ones that went down into this underworld of the soul beneath Giza. So what is this diamond, this crystal? Well, back to the 5th hour of the Duat, ruled by Sokar, there is a very strange object that's depicted in association with this hour. It's referred to generally as a bell, but I believe it's possibly the Benben, the original Benben. The Benben stone is some kind of stone of creation that's said to exist within a hidden chamber, guarded by this god Sokar, who is, as I said, the guardian, this underworld god of Giza. And he himself is the guardian, the secret chamber itself is known as the Shetiet, which is known as the tomb of God. It's also synonymous with the tomb of Osiris. So is it possible that the true object in here is the original Benben? Well, the concept of like these stones or crystals or of creation is something that's worldwide. In the Greek world, they were known as omphiloses or omphilai, which is the plural. Here you can see pictures of them. Here's one even from Egypt, from Siwa in southern Egypt. Here's the one at Delphi, which marked, like the center. And they represent the center of creation, the center of the world, the center of the universe. From this point, all physical matter was formed. And they were often guarded by a snake, just like El Hanash. Here's an image from Pompeii. As a snake guarding the omphalos against this weird monster, probably Typhon or something like that, which guards it. And the omphilai in Indian tradition are known as lingams. They represent exactly the same thing, the point of first creation, both male and female together. And in the Edfu building text, it says that in the underworld of the soul is a sacred object, a power object known as the seed or embryo. And I'm positive that that's exactly what we have here. And this is precisely what my psychic friend Bernard told us would eventually be discovered in this underground complex at Giza, this huge, great crystal, and that somehow, he said, Bernard, that this was all connected with sound, the use of sound, and it was a very ancient technology which he believed went back tens of thousands of years. I can't prove that it did, but that it ended up at Giza and was used in the creation of what we call the crystal chambers, others would call the Hall of Records or the Duat, or whatever you want to call it, names have been handed down to us, the Tomb of God. And I show here just a couple of pictures of Adam's calendar, which I was kindly shown by Michael and Johan and the crew the other day. And although Michael and Johan know that I don't accept their dating for Adam's calendar, I do accept that it is a very, very important ancient site, and I encourage their work there. And I believe that Michael is right to continue his work into sound acoustics there, because just something tells me that he's onto the right track. He's on the right track here. And just as a final little amusing anecdote, here's something funny. This is the advert for Zahi Hawas's lecture for the upcoming Edgar Cayce ARE's Ancient Mysteries Conference in 2011, right? And I'll read you out what it says here. His appearance in 2010, he was there last year, sold out. This year, 2011, he will report on explorations further into Collins Caves and the deeper drilling under the Sphinx in search of the Hall of Records. I say no more. Thank you very much. And obviously this is just a sell bit, if I may. The whole story of the discovery of the caves is contained in my book, Beneath the Pyramids, which you can get from Amazon or online or from my website. And very shortly there is a new DVD coming out telling the whole story of the discovery of the caves, with interviews with all the people involved, called The Lost Caves of Giza, which if you come onto my website, andrewcollins.com, then just press and you can get e-newsletters from me, plus follow everything on Facebook as well. There's a link on andrewcollins.com through to there. So thank you very much. Cheers. What I showed was that the shamanic elite behind it, who are remembered in the ancient texts as the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Shining Ones, the gods, the immortals, had almost certainly come originally from Egypt, the Nile Valley in particular. They were bird shamans, very tall, possibly with albino features, and they would seem possibly to have been behind much earlier activity in Africa itself. And it's some of this that I'd like to talk to you about today, and ancient Egypt in general. Now, obviously many of you probably know the idea that there may be something awaiting discovery beneath the pyramids at Giza. The idea that there has been some kind of hidden or secret chamber there has been popular certainly since the 1910s, when it first appeared in newspapers. However, it was the American psychic Edgar Cayce who really brought the whole subject to the fore. And between 1926 and 1941, he gave a number of psychic readings which referred to what he called the Hall of Records. Now, he saw them quite physically as some kind of chamber in the vicinity of the Sphinx, containing the tablets or records of a previous civilization that had occupied Egypt around 10 to 11,000 BC. And right from 1957 on to the present day, there have been a number of explorations, almost all of them legally done through the authorities. The first was 2 American women in 1957, began in 1985, and I'll happily admit that it was through some psychic work that I was doing with a good friend of mine, and a very strange dream he had relating to the Sphinx, and I'll talk about his work later on. But this culminated with some incredible discoveries in 2008, which I need to talk to you about now. But just as a little backdrop, there is a number of ancient texts that seem to refer to some kind of underworld in the vicinity of Giza and its plateau. For instance, the Edfu building text, which Graham talked about last night in his lecture, although from the Ptolemaic period, i.e. just before the time of Christ, almost certainly record very, very ancient accounts of primeval beings, known as the eldest ones or the primeval ones, that existed during a primordial age, not just in Egypt, but in the area of Giza. And there's talk of them within the text constructing some kind of island, and on that island a building, the first ever temple, and that this led down to an underground structure known as the underworld of the soul, the Duat Embar is what it's referred to. And into this the mythical beings would go using power objects to affect creation in the outside world. The image you can see here, minus the strange watcher figure, which I've added, is actually from the psychic that I was working with. I was telling you about a guy called Bernard, who sadly died last year. And he said exactly the same thing. And this was long before I even found out anything about the Edfu building text, that there was a divine island at Giza. And of course, this is what Antoine was also talking about yesterday. So I would agree with all of this work. Now, within the ancient funerary texts of Egypt, it talks about a cave underworld that's on the ground and in the air. It's known as the Duat, who went to the Giza Plateau, a time of great unrest in Egypt, and somehow were able to get drilling done in the area of the Sphinx Temple, which is what Robert Temple was talking to you about yesterday. And although they didn't find anything other than the water table itself, this began the explorations, which are always, in some way, shape or form, got some connection with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, which is known as the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of which I'm a regular speaker at their conferences in Virginia Beach. Now, the latest explorations around the Sphinx looking for hidden chambers actually took place as recently as 2008. Dr. Zahi Hawass and the American archaeologist Dr. Mark Lerner used angular drills, supposedly to check the groundwater around the Sphinx. But I don't think it's any great secret that their true aim was to check out the latest ideas relating to chambers beneath the Sphinx, the body of the Sphinx. However, in 2010, our good friend Dr. Hawass said officially that there are no hidden chambers or tunnels under the Sphinx, and that, to be honest, he would not entertain any further exploration in that area, full stop. Well, of course, he's now gone. I'm sure plenty of people will clap their hands over that one. But he was like a pantomime dame because, you know, on the outside, in the public thing, he denounced all of these subjects, but in private, he believed in all of them. So there's double standards for you. Now, my own quest to understand Gizas Cave Underworld, same name that appears in the Edfu building texts for this structure beneath Giza. And as Graham said, in the fifth house of this duat, which there's 12 houses, each one relates to the 12 hours of the night, through which the sun is seen to pass, which is also reflected in the soul of the pharaoh as he goes into death and passes through this duat or underworld on his way to an afterlife amongst the stars, that there is an area known as Rostau, and Rostau is guarded by this figure here who's known as Sokar. Sokar was an underworld falcon-headed god associated very specifically with the necropolis of Memphis, i.e. that which includes Giza. In fact, it's from that we get the name of the necropolis called Saqqara. And there are some very odd structures there, which we'll come back to, but they seem to relate directly to Giza. Now, the duat, as I said, is reflected both on the ground, in a physical sense, and in the air as well as the Milky Way, where it is associated with one goddess in particular, and that's Nuit. Some people call her Nut, but I think that's doing her an injustice of her name. And it is believed that her body actually represented the duat in the air. Now, her cult is entangled completely with that of another sky goddess by the name of Hathor. And Hathor was said to give birth to the sun each day from between her groins in the form of a cow. And this cow would appear between two sycamores and be reborn. And those two sycamores relate to what's known as the dark rift or Cygnus rift of the Milky Way. Yeah.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if we could please take our seats so we can welcome our next distinguished speaker. Yesterday, Andrew Collins gave us a fascinating account of Göbekli Tepe and the amazing discoveries there, and how that also pushes back the timeline of human activities and achievements. And I just love listening to that, because I see so much, personally, so much interesting crossover between some of the things that we're finding in southern Africa to the Göbekli Tepe structures. But today, Andrew is going to take us on a very, very exciting journey of discovery that he made, and very few people are actually aware of this. And those are the underground caves at Giza Plateau under the pyramid. And it is truly fascinating. I've seen this before, and so hold on for an absolutely fascinating journey. Andrew Collins.
Hiya. Okay, plenty to get through, 1 hour to do it. So I just want to dedicate this lecture to my wife, who's actually watching me at this moment from our home very close to Stonehenge. So, hi, Sue. Okay. Now, yesterday, as Michael said, we talked about Göbekli Tepe. This is the oldest stone temple complex in the world, as officially dated. That's 10,000 BC to around 8,000 BC, when it was deliberately buried.